So my name is Marek Laskowski. I'm on the core team of OpenDefi, a DAO that's launching later this year. And our mission is to incubate the next generation of DeFi that's going to be inherently multi-chain and increasingly leveraging machine intelligence. It's my sincere pleasure to be moderating this illustrious panel on the transition between traditional finance, so-called TradFi, and decentralized finance, or DeFi. In the last year and a half, decentralized finance has taken the blockchain world by storm and is increasingly enjoying interest from traditional financial players, and also was recently celebrated on the cover of Fortune magazine. So, in opening, can I ask the panel members introduce themselves and tell us about what steps each of you took to make the transition between TradFi to DeFi? Was it more a matter of mindset, technical issues, legal issues, community, or culture?
So let's see, I'm Lily Liu. I've been doing various things in the blockchain ecosystem for a number of years now. Got interested back in 2013, 2014, when it was really a Bitcoin only world. And back then there was still, vision that Bitcoin would sort of, be the base layer for, now and the future. And that's obviously changed a little bit. And so I had a company called Earn.com, which we sold to Coinbase a few years ago, which was, imagine a number of different applications to be built in this area. And so for myself, with DeFi, honestly, initially I was a little bit skeptical, right? Because I was unsure sort of how collateral would be able to hold up with the extreme volatility we have in this ecosystem. And I've been somewhere between pleasantly surprised, wrong, and now complete, enthusiast. I'm so excited about what is possible with DeFi, right? And I still think we're really in the early innings of the many things that can be built. So I suppose my conversion was, if there's kind of like a Maslow hierarchy of like attractions, right? For sure, number one of them that appeals to everyone is just the yields, right? When you see yields of 20% on stables, and then the sky's limit on any range of asset quality, right? You're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to look into that and just kind of see what's going on. And as I started to look into it, especially now that we sort of have a range of scaling solutions, new layer ones really sort of making the space more accessible and more performant, it works really well, right? It's constant innovation, which I think is pretty amazing, right? So per your question, I think that the first thing that kind of catches, new entrants' eyes is certainly the yields. But then once you look into, you think, wow, there's so much innovation, right? And I, as a consumer, right, as an individual, have the opportunity to partake in layers of the financial system that previously are sort of in liquidity pools, which are sort of behind multiple layers and typically sort of managed by a select few wholesale banks, right? Dark pools, so on and so forth. And I think that's amazing on many different levels.
Awesome. Thank you. How about Andrea, you can next?
Sure. So I wouldn't say I come from a pure traditional finance background, but more as a startup operator. And since 2018, I've been operating at the intersection of TradFi and DeFi. And so I would actually say that I joined crypto mainly because of the mission initially. In my 20s, I started a fundraising platform to teach kids how to raise money as young as 8 years old, how to raise $1,000 all the way to $40,000. And it was guided by this mission to help everyday people access capital. And I followed that theme throughout my career. After starting the company, it was getting into venture capital and then working at a blockchain fintech company, and now leading investments at Stellar Development Foundation, where we invest in this exact intersection. And so I would say that the turning point for me was really seeing ICOs blow up and take hold, where I was like, wow, people are able to invest in new kinds of assets. This is accessible for everyday people, and anyone with a good idea can actually raise capital as well. And so that was mind blowing to me and very thematically on point. And so I'd like to say that I think anyone that has like a curiosity to learn and a desire to solve problems and really improve the status quo can make that leap.
Awesome. Alejandro, please.
Thank you very much, Marek. Yeah, so I'm the co-founder of a company called Freight, and in Freight, what we used to do was helping people in international trade finance or international trade to access liquidity, right? One of the things that we're just going into the traditional space was like, look, guys, you are too small. Your product is too complex for us. We don't understand it. You need to look for other options. And finally, in 2018, when we just put our proof of concept that called the IO of MakerDAO, and we started doing actually just pilots with the guys from Maker. And it was our opportunity, in a way, to finally just have the chance to prove our proof of concept and make it a full business case and a full business that started 18 months ago. We have placed more than $6 million so far, and we have done this through Centrifuge. We are the oldest pool in the Centrifuge protocol Contil Lake, and we are all the pioneers actually of bringing real world assets right into the DeFi space. And it's funny because we tried really hard in traditional space. It never happened, and DeFi for us was that opportunity, right? So from that, we created this new venture that is called Defactor. And what we're doing in Defactor is helping traditional businesses to get a hold or scale the use of DeFi funds, right? Because, well, it's fairly new, is a bit tricky actually to use. And that's kind of our idea in a way. Like we see tons of opportunities of bringing real world assets into DeFi. We believe that that's kind of the next stage, and it will help stabilizing the whole DeFi space, the whole market, and also just growing the market out of proportion because the opportunity out there is just huge.
Cool, thank you. Ilya, how about you go next?
Hello. Yeah. So my name is Ilya. I'm a partner at Sanctor Capital. We focus on early stage projects in the crypto space. Really try to be super active in kind of supporting early stage teams. We have kind of a program called Sanctor Turbo, even that we put together to kind of surround projects with kind of mentors from our mentorship network, and really kind of support early stage teams and kind of getting their feet strong under with respects to kind of building their product and getting all the support they need to kind of really have a good chance to succeed. I come from a traditional finance space. I started out in kind of quant equities, and for me that transition was very organic because I'm a comp sci and econ, and so I got brought in to work on crypto fintech as in a consulting role at one point, and kind of learning all about the tech kind of really excited me. I came into it from kind of an algorithmic perspective, and kind of what excited me about is kind of all of the new things you can do and kind of how far you can push what I've already seen on the traditional finance side, like what all of the new things and all of the new blocks and components that you can do. And, while sometimes the media narrative was a lot about the prices. I got, very early in contact with a lot of the developers. And so I was really excited about the stuff that was being built. And I guess that kind of, helped form my kind of relationship with the industry.
Idan, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So I come from traditional investments background. I worked in KPMG Israel Transaction Services, did due diligence for M&A transactions for a few years, and also worked for one of Israel's largest private equity funds. And I was kind of engaged with Bitcoin for a few years, but I never got into the Ethereum ecosystem. And some good friends of mine showed me compound finance in about June, just before DeFi summer last year. And I just went down the rabbit hole and eventually kind of decided like, I don't want to do anything else. And along the way, I connected with an Israeli VC fund called Collider, which are doing only blockchain and crypto. And it was kind of a perfect match. And they welcomed me into crypto and Web3 and DeFi. And now I joined them and I'm doing growth investments within Collider. And I think for me, getting into DeFi and doing the transition I spent a lot of time just learning the technical stuff. So I did a few actual courses on Udemy on blockchain and Solidity. It was super important for me to learn the technical details and kind of learn how to to read the code on a basic level, yeah, but understand how things work. And I spend a lot of time kind of understanding the different protocol designs, read a lot of white papers, and until today I spend about at least 10 or 15 hours a week just learning and reading documentation for the different products. And I think like the best advice for me for anyone getting into DeFi is using your hands, because what's so unique about this world is you can actually engage with every product, basically. Even with the crazy gas prices right now, right? You can still pretty much use everything, and you learn so much from just trying. So the best advice I would give is try mint an NFT, try to sell it, try to list it on OpenSea. Every DeFi protocol you see, try to work with it and kind of see what it does. And I think there's also a mindset change when you understand that everything is open, right? You can just go into Discord and just ask, and people will answer you. It's so different from traditional finance where everything is kind of blocked, so that's a huge thing for me. And you have to kind of get used to that. And I think that like, don't be afraid of meme and cultures. That's kind of the changes in mindset I had to do, again, which are very different from traditional finance.
Awesome. Great. What a wonderful, well-rounded panel we have here. So, next up, what challenges are there? What are the major challenges for those that are currently in TradFi and, they want to make the leap to DeFi? Also, so sort of a two-part question, why should they make that leap? What's really in it for them? Let's maybe start with Andrea this time.
Sure. So I think of kind of this transition between TradFi to DeFi on kind of in two buckets. I think the first is most of DeFi and blockchain operates like startups. They're new ideas, they're crashing and burning, and they operate at the speed of a small company. And when you look at traditional finance, most of these are big companies that are slow moving. So the first transition is kind of the big company to small company transition, which is a whole topic in it of itself, right? And so you have, and so I'm not going to go into details of that transition, but I would say that that's one of the first pieces to understand, going from big to small, and being aware of that. And I think the best way to overcome that is just to do it. It's not always for everyone, but if there's interest, then there's a lot of possibility. I think the second piece is not only is it fast moving in like a lot of small companies, the second piece is that crypto is constantly changing. It's so hard to just keep up with the technology or the idea of the day. You have to constantly be learning and being able to change. And so if you look at my career, I've had to change roles every 2 years. And my whole career has been about learning. Whereas for a lot of folks that have risen the ranks in traditional finance, they probably have gotten really, really good at doing one thing in a very closed environment with less uncertainty. And so that's a big transition. I think a lot of executives try to make the leap. But again, you have to know how to make connections, learn new things constantly, and be super open-minded. So I would say those are kind of the two main things to be aware of. However, I do think there's tremendous opportunity for people who can make the leap. I like to say that I'm kind of in between the two worlds. And so I like to see kind of crypto natives over here, like the wild, wild west, and then traditional finance over here sometimes lack imagination and move a bit slower. But if you can operate in the middle, that is so important right now, because that is really where the gaps are. And so if you can make that translation, there's opportunity, money. You can go to a bigger company to lead the strategy. You can start a company, but you can, just bridge the gap. And I think that's where a lot of the missing pieces right now.
Okay, thank you. Lily, we hear from you next.
Sure. And so what do I think? I think that it's not a choice, right, between traditional finance and DeFi, just in the same way it's not a choice between a centralized exchange and DEXs, right? These are all sort of complementary ways of accessing money, accessing financial systems. I prefer to think about it sort of first, like what DeFi can help us do is really grow the pie of, financial, a variety of financial products and grow their accessibility to, there's been a lot written about. So for example, the unbanked, which I know Stellar has, been a core part of Stellar's mission from the very beginning. Right. And so, it's complementary in some ways. I think that's the optimistic view of it. I do think that it will also sort of eat from the current market share of traditional finance for sure, right? Both in terms of people from traditional finance thinking, this is more interesting, it's more fun. And so I'm going to jump and sort of onboard a number of people into the DeFi world. So I think it's a combination of those two things where I think growing the pie and also sort of eating from existing services out there. What I think is quite challenging for sure is, yesterday there was a Poly Network cap, right? $600 million. I think that gives a whole lot of people pause for a good reason, right? Not many people are, as capable and entrepreneurial and also, have the time flexibility like Idan to go and actually learn all of this stuff and how to read smart contracts. And so inherently there's going to be a lot of people that need to have a, trusted third party type of trust model, right? So I guess what we're arguing for in DeFi is that instead of that being Schwab or Bank of America, right, there's someone else that you have a choice to trust instead of, one of the panoply of the few that we have today. But I think that, to say that's just, and I think that's, for example, why Coinbase and Kraken, a number of other exchanges kind of fill that space right now. To go straight into DeFi the way it is today, I think is frankly terrifying for a number of people, even for myself. Every time I put something across a bridge, I sweat, right? And so that's a big challenge, right? Because the number one thing in money is you're not going to lose it outright. And then the number two thing, and this happens one of two ways, is either gets stolen, right? Or it gets inflated away to nothing, i.e. if there's if you don't have blockchain security, right? Because you can double spend and things like that. Number one thing. And so that's certainly the largest challenge. But I do think that, look, for me, it's very clear, this is the future. And, there are things that scare people, right? Like the rough and tumble communities, right? These wild Discord chats with degens and pseudonyms and who is who, and how do I know you're not a North Korean terrorist type of things, right? And so that's absolutely terrifying in one way. But then I think it's just, for someone, both individually as an institution, right, culturally, are you going to look at this half full or half empty? And, there's no right or wrong way to think about it, depending on what your risk appetite is, your stakeholders, whatever. But I think that crypto is really leading on a number of even the cultural points, right? Remember earlier this year when the whole Robinhood GameStop thing blew up and Wall Street was like, oh my gosh, where is this coming from? I've never seen anything like this. And I was just like, wait, this is just crypto, right? This is crypto on an average day back in 2015, guys, right? And so I really do think that we in crypto are leading the edge. And it's not because we are crypto, it's because we found a way to sort of flatten, to truly make the world flat, right? And involve all sorts of folks. I mean, there's some projects out there, you have 12-year-olds, right, making a real splash. And so to Andrea's point, they didn't go an analyst at Goldman Sachs or, whatever vaunted institution and become really, really great at leverage finance in the FIG industry, right? And they're making a splash. And so I see it as, some people are really attracted to or really scared away by the extreme fluidity of not just what is going to become the DeFi assets on the platform, but also the extreme fluidity of talent, of consensus, right? Like people consensus, which happens in the community. And look, that's just kind of what it is. And for some people, that's incredibly exciting because it's just who they are as a person. For other people, is deathly terrifying.
Yeah, interesting. This cultural sort of collision of traditional finance and so-called DeFi apes, they call them, right? So, agreed. Alejandro, please, we'd like to hear from you as well.
Yeah, there's so many good points actually you made there. I would like to add something, right? And when you have such an amalgamation, right, and blend of different skill sets, because the fact in DeFi is everybody has a past life. Absolutely everybody, unless you are 15 years old or something like that. But you are 20 plus, you have a past life. You were either studying something or you have a career in who knows what. Like personally, my background is in supply chain and supply chain management, supply chain finance, and so on, right? So having a seat and talking about technical stuff that I learned not long ago, that creates such a powerful actually ecosystem, right? And that's what we see in DeFi. And I think that's super important, right? Because when you start just seeing like traditional finance, right? Is unless you are someone that is coming from the finance world, you will never tap into those tables. It will really difficult to just go there, right? Like just having a conversation with someone is like, I know you're not qualified. You can't be here, right? You don't belong here. And I think that's something that DeFi has changed completely, and it's super interesting. And I hope actually it stays like that, right? That is not just a detailed representation of what was happening in the traditional finance. And I hope as a community, right, as an ecosystem, we keep it that way. So that's, I think that for me is an important point. One of the things that I believe is the reason why it is attracting so many people from the traditional finance space, right? It's like as Lily mentioned, there are no new opportunities, and we have come across a lot of traditional companies that are trying to expand their businesses, for example, in America. And when they go actually into traditional investors, they say it's not the right time. We deal a lot with trade finance. And trade finance, after the debacle of Greensill, I don't know if you guys are aware, but that thing was just basically broke completely the whole trade finance market, right? So there's a lot of people that are trying to say, like, look, we have a business actually that is solid. And traditional institutions are saying, no, we're not interested whatsoever doing anything with trade finance. It's too risky. And it's too risky because they don't have the tools or they don't have the technology actually to assess trade finance properly. And that's okay, right? That's not their business. However, like DeFi is allowing actually just to, for example, gather so much data, right? And use that data in order to just do holistic assessment of, for example, a whole supply chain and mitigate risk as is possible. So I'm saying there are a lot of new opportunities. Also, the investors in the DeFi space have a higher risk appetite. And that's something that is needed as well. You cannot be just always trying to just playing so safe that you are kind of stagnating growth in a lot of markets, right? And that's what happens in developing countries. That happens as well with the small and medium entities, right? Like all the SMEs are struggling right now to get funding because traditional sector are playing so safe that for these guys it's almost impossible to get funding. And if you, for example, from a trade finance point of view, if you are actually stopping funding trade finance, you're stopping the fuel of international commerce. So somebody needs to step into those gaps. And I think DeFi is the perfect opportunity for companies, right, to just growing into that space and providing that gap in the finance that at the moment is something like $1.5 trillion is huge, right? So try to imagine if DeFi managed to capture at 10% of that, how big DeFi will be, right? It's like a DeFi stops being like this hype word to actually just position itself as a true competitor in the market, right? And saying like, look, we're here just to help. We're here to just change a little bit the dynamic on how financial systems are working. And that's kind of, I see the opportunity, a real opportunity in this new space.
Yeah, I'm also very interested to see how it evolves in the future. Certainly, there's different risk profiles and risk sort of preferences in both. Very, very true. Idan, why don't you go next?
Yeah, sure. Great point. I think I would add that one of the challenges is a social challenge because people will look at you in a certain way when you're moving from TradFi to DeFi. Some might think you're crazy, right? And basically we're in early days and we're taking a bet on the industry. So you kind of have to find like anchors of conviction, at least for me, because in some points of time you will feel uncertain about the future. And it's important to build your conviction out. For me, a lot of times I just watch Chris Dixon lectures on crypto networks, which, it kind of gives you a macro perspective on things. And it calms me down when I'm seeing things like yesterday, like $600 million hack. And I need to understand that, I'm not crazy, because it feels like a computer game sometimes. So that is one thing. And I think that the interesting things in DeFi are the things we haven't seen yet, because the notion of programmable assets and money will create so many new opportunities and new kind of assets that, you're starting to see in the edges of the market, these new kind of assets that maybe decompose certain financial assets to different yield structures, and all these things that took in traditional finance, it took 50 years to come to light. And you can't even imagine what kind of things people will come up with when you can program these assets. And I'm really excited to see kind of in 3 years from now, 4 years from now, which kind of possibilities we'll have around that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And then I'd love to hear from Ilya. What do you think?
Thank you. So I think there's a couple of challenges with respect to, for traditional finance professionals, they tend to be a little bit more conservative. So the hype can kind of actually be kind of a scare factor, because kind of the magazines, the literature kind of seems to be a little bit more conservative regarding the topics that you discuss in traditional finance. And there is a little bit more hype and excitement in crypto. And so you have to kind of dig a little bit deeper to kind of unearth the kind of the meat of it. And it's also you have to kind of overcome the specialization factor, in the sense that in finance, even when you are kind of on the quant side, right, there's a little bit more of, there's quants and then there's IT. Whereas in DeFi, right, it's that line is very blurred, right? And you have to understand the tech in order to be able to kind of, diligently do what you need to do, right? You need to understand the difference between layer ones, the infrastructure, how the transactions are made. A lot of this comes into play. And that might be a little bit of a challenge for a traditional finance professional, right? They need to catch up and understand the tech in order to be able to implement the things that they know and have experience in. But I think that's also kind of where the opportunity lies, because for traditional finance professionals, when they see things that can be made better, there's kind of a lot of history that works against them, in the sense that stack's already built, right? There's a lot of things that they inherit. And to change something, you have to kind of rework a lot of times that entire stack. And so things kind of tend to be a little bit more stagnant, because the effort to change something small may be incredible. Whereas then with DeFi, you're kind of working from ground zero almost, right? You're building that stack, and you're able to kind of take all of the learnings that you've seen in hundreds of years of traditional finance and kind of take that next step, right? You have all of these primitives and you're kind of rebuilding the core components. And so I think that's kind of the exciting part, and kind of the ability to really kind of shape things in a different way.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. Interesting. So we're kind of running out of time a little bit. So I've got one fun question that maybe everybody can sort of take a quick swing at. What does TradFi have to learn from DeFi, and what does DeFi have to learn from TradFi? Let's turn it back over to you, Ilya. Why don't you take it?
So I think that the two sides need to stop looking at each other as one versus the other, because kind of finance is finance, right? Math and economics kind of work the same way. It's kind of the ability to implement and take those principles further. That is kind of what DeFi has to offer, but it needs to kind of learn from kind of the traditional finance, right? Just because you're kind of able to implement this new technology kind of doesn't mean you can ignore kind of the laws of economics and finance and mathematics, right? They still work, and you kind of still have to obey them. As far as traditional finance, you just need to be a little bit open-minded, right? Because there is a lot of this stuff, and that is the next step. And kind of, if you're open up to it, there's just a lot more that you can do that you're currently not able to with the current stack.
Okay, thank you, Alejandro.
Well, I think traditional finance can learn from DeFi be nimble and flexible, right? And understand that the horizons are way broader than what we can see so far. and that new technology can help us just to expand all that, right? That there is way more than what we know at the moment. I think DeFi can learn from traditional finance. Reporting, critical, doesn't exist right now in DeFi and is needed. User experience, critical as well. We don't have it. And if we want to scale actually DeFi, we need it. And it's something I think now DeFi is focused actually on this deep layer, how we extract funds, how we make it really efficient. But now we need to start teaching people how this all works and how we're going to be scaling it. And the easiest way is like a UX, UI. That's critical. I think that's the next step, right?
Okay, thank you. Andrea, why don't you go next, please?
I would say that traditional finance needs to learn that there's a new generation that doesn't like the status quo. They want new types of assets. They want more transparency. They want more freedom and lack of regulation. And for so long, so much capital has been locked up in this old system, and they've gotten lazy and bloated, and they refuse to understand that money votes, right? And so, just realizing that this younger generation is getting impatient and doesn't want the same things and is going to challenge them, and that it's here to stay. In terms of what DeFi could learn, I would say that from an investing standpoint, there's a lack of discipline and realism sometimes. I think people can be overly ideological at times, thinking that we're going to be in this utopian world that's completely unregulated, 100% transparent, that everyday people understand private keys and want to custody their own things, when everyday people in other countries are 100% cash-based and need more real use cases than just trading. And so I would echo the idea that it needs to be much more a better user experience, maybe more practical use cases to really move from early adopter to the mainstream. Because I think crypto in itself is so intellectually stimulating. And the early adopters are these fintech or like finance wizards, or like you could just dig a hole into trading for years, right? But it's like, how do you make this accessible to the everyday people who are not technical and not rich and don't have any other options?
Great. Excellent. Thank you. And then I guess we'll hear from Idan, please.
Yeah, sure. I think TradFi should learn from DeFi to be more competitive and build a more competitive environment, because traditional financial systems prefer stability over competition. And that's why we're seeing the too big to fail and a lot of concentration around the traditional financial systems. And DeFi is just competitive, right? It's just an open, unregulated system right now. And I don't think TradFi will learn this, but I would certainly be happy if we had more competition in the traditional finance sector. And with regards to DeFi, I would say that maybe be a bit more responsible. But I wouldn't really mean it, because I think that's the phase we're in right now, in the move fast, break things phase, and a lot of innovation comes out of it. But when it comes to funds and people's money, so you have to be more careful. And the sort of things we've seen yesterday should not happen. But I guess they will happen. So, and that's part of the growing up of the industry.
Cool, thank you. And last but not least, Lily, final thoughts.
Sure. I think that DeFi, a lot of folks it's so technology kind of first and engineering first driven, right? I find like there's kind of this existential sort of, is it technology or is it money? And I think so folks within crypto, I think we got to recognize that first and foremost, it actually is money, right? And then I think that TradFi folks need to realize that it's not your money, it is your client's money, it is users' money, right? And this is not sort of your inventory to do things with, right? But that's kind of the way the system has grown up because of the lack of technical options to do it otherwise. And so I think that DeFi probably needs to. We can't really grow that much as an industry if you've got $600 million hacks happening every so often, right? That's a industry limiting thing that happens. And so responsibility, growing up a little bit. I think that while I, find a number of these platforms to be fun, right? But I think if you put a pancake swap, if you put a Dino swap in front of someone from traditional finance, they're just going to laugh at you, right? They do. My kids love it, right? My 5-year-old thinks it's awesome that there's dinosaurs crossing a bridge, but I think that UI has some scalability limitations. The toddlers don't necessarily think the same way as Wall Street executives, and so I think that's one thing that can happen, but that will happen. It's already happening. So I think things like that, and then for TradFi, I think. I just really need to take note because, it's like the transition between newspapers and blogging, right? I'm sure you tried to stop that. How did that go for you, right?
Right. Or the music industry, right?
Or the music industry, or there's a long, long list, right? And so this one, it's basically the unstoppable force. And I think what we saw the last week was people tried, right? And the narrative, folks are looking for a narrative, and the strongest one is investor protection, right? The narrative always comes down to, I'm helping people from hurting themselves, right? That's not just applied to DeFi, that's applied to so many things these days. Because it's the sort of I feel like when people say that, you're kind of grasping for straws a little bit because you got to come up with something, right? So of course, people don't want to talk about, this is going to empower potentially, thousands, if not millions, if not even billions of folks to access entirely new financial products. And if you really sort of cared about the little guy out there, right, no one really wants to talk about as much the fact that some financial products are completely inaccessible, right? If you sort of have these DeFi Lego blocks, right, then you can actually start to do things like peer-to-peer lending and sort of revive some of these back to the future concepts when everyone lived in a peer-to-peer world 200 years ago with no internet, but things like mutual aid societies, right? Social insurance, like local insurance pools, all these things, totally innovative. Unfortunately, it doesn't flow revenue through necessarily to your listed company.
Okay, thank you. And, thanks everyone for those insights. That's all the time we have. I also want to thank the audience for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed joining us for a little while.